Go ahead and get started. I don't need to delay any further. I see some people joining. Thanks everyone for coming again today. I see some familiar names in the audience. I'm glad to see you guys coming back. For those who registered, you probably noticed that this is a recurring series, and so we're kind of trying something different here. We're going to try to keep the meetings, in a consistent time slot, bi-weekly. And pull in some really interesting either data partners that we work with to learn, directly from those data partners a little bit more about the data sets that they provide, or to hear some of the research that's being done from our users on some of those data sets that they're using on the platform. I apologize if there was a mix-up for anyone around the time of this one. We did push it an hour from what will be kind of our normal time moving forward, just to work around some of the scheduling challenges. But basically, you should be subscribed for future meetings as well. So we hope to see you guys come back whenever you're available. Obviously not mandatory. Come to the ones that look interesting to you. And we're glad to see you here. Before we jump in, I do have a couple of just like housekeeping things I wanted to mention. I have, for those actually who haven't met me, I'm Evan. I'm the founder of Dewey. I appreciate you guys as being early users of the platform. I'm always looking for feedback on the product and what we're building, and I want to make sure that we're building a platform that's as valuable to the users as possible. And so one of my asks this week is I'm actually evaluating a lot of new data sets and vendors to bring onto the platform. There's no better person to tell me what's going to be a good data set than you, the researchers who will be using the data. So if you have any interest in getting kind of an early sneak peek at some of the data vendors and helping me make those decisions, and even potentially seeing these data schemas and helping me evaluate, I'm really interested in hearing from my users of which data sets are going to be interesting to them, because there is effectively a seemingly unlimited number of data sets out there that I'm starting to have these conversations with. So if you're interested in participating, I would love for you to email me. My email is just evan@deweydata.io. Or if you just write into info@deweydata, I'll see it and I'd be happy to connect. Last thing, we do have a Q&A feature. Feel free to use it. I prefer when we kind of can use those questions and ask them as they come up. And so I'll interrupt MT or Ryan as they come up, so we're not just, bucketing all those questions at the end. So feel free to ask questions. It really helps when you guys participate and helps kind of drive the conversation and making sure we're pushing this conversation in the right direction. With that, I will start to hand it over to MT. Michael Taylor is from SafeGraph. We used to be coworkers. For those that don't know, I used to work at SafeGraph as well. So I'm very familiar with the SafeGraph data sets, but I'm really excited to kind of hand it over to him because he is a product manager at SafeGraph. He's super experienced in understanding the data sets. These data sets are available on the Dewey platform, and he's going to focus today mostly on the places data set and the spend data. And that spend data specifically is something that's a little bit newer to this audience. And so I wanted to spend some time diving in and letting you guys know about the value of what's in that platform. We'll follow that up with a quick presentation from Ryan, who's a data scientist on the Dewey side. And he has some good kind of like tutorials that he's put together about starting to use that spend data. So again, this is one of the deep dives into our data vendors on the platform. And with that, I'll hand it over to MT. Take it away.
All right. Thanks, Evan. Happy to be here. Appreciate you guys logging in today. I learn a little bit more about SafeGraph. I'm going to give you a kind of a deep dive into a couple of the products we have. I'm going to start from the top. I know some of you might be familiar with our data set, but for those that aren't, when you think SafeGraph, think places. SafeGraph is a places data company. And what that means is that we're trying to aggregate information on places around the world, provide that information as a data set that can be used for many, many different use cases. We break it up in a couple of ways. We try and provide what we consider to be like the fundamental or identification type attributes about the place. So like, where is it? What's its name? What's its address? And then where applicable, we add on additional like contextual or rich attributes to help with additional analysis and kind of a deep dive. So the key takeaway there really is SafeGraph is a places data company. Of course, biggest question is what do we mean by a place? And really a place to us is anywhere that you can put on a map that isn't a single family residential home. So we're not in the residential space, other than say apartment complexes and whatnot. We're looking at all the other places. So everything from ATMs to airports, from national parks to restaurants. I mentioned that because a lot of the data sets that are out there have just kind of like the big brands or the chain stores as part of the places coverage. We're literally, I don't want to say everything per se, because no data set has everything, but we try to get all of these places all over the world. And then, as I mentioned earlier, about each of those places, we provide a long list of attributes. These are not all of them, and I won't go through all of them today. They're all available on our website for those that are interested. One key component is the place key, or the individual unique identifier about each of these places. We include that for not only joining our data sets together, but also anyone else that uses place key. We provide that, like I said, the address, the location name, the base features about the place, but then we'll include industry categorization. We'll include open hours. We'll include phone numbers, websites, brand affiliations. Hopefully that makes the point as to what it is that we're doing here. We're providing a lot of rich context around each of these places to, again, to power a lot of unique use cases. I won't go through this long list. Again, it's on the website. I will dig in on a couple of them, just specifically that I think might be relevant for the group here. So a key one is the opened and closed dates, right? So we've been working on this for a while. We've been tracking it over time. So we've got a little bit of history built up here, but we try and identify the month where a place comes online, right? Opens its doors, as well as the month where a place would close its doors. And we are trying to track that permanently. What this is super helpful for is just understanding where places are opening, where places are closing. What does that mean for an area, for a city, for a neighborhood? Are they certain types of places that are doing well, certain types of places that are not? Again, this is updated on a monthly basis. We release that information, and we find a lot of people that use it really successfully for trends. Another thing I'll call out is our premise of category tags. I mentioned industry earlier. We use the NAICS classification, so great to know that it's a quick service restaurant or a grocery store. But within that, there's a lot more granularity that's really necessary to do a lot of different workflows. So within, say, quick service restaurants, like, is it a pizza joint? Is it a burger joint? Is it open late? Things of that nature. The list that you're actually looking at on this slide, all of those tags are applicable to at least one place that we flag as a clothing store. So you can tell that there's just a huge level of detail that kind of exists beneath that industry classification. It's also really helpful across industry classification. So if you don't really care what the place calls itself or the industry that it plays in, you just want to know if it's, serves coffee, this is another way to kind of approach that. So definitely think about these category tags as you're thinking about trying to specify the granularity of places and what they do. One other thing that I haven't really hit on at all to this point is kind of the shapes of these places. So we do provide polygons for those that are interested, very helpful for laying things out on a map. Also very helpful for understanding kind of the relationships between the places. Do they share a building? Are they part of the same mall? Are they large stores? Are they small stores? Are they large footprints? If you're talking about national parks, things like that. So if there's a need for the shape of a place, we do provide it as a polygon wicket. And then again, we also try and provide the kind of relationships there, the parent-child type relationships. We call it spatial hierarchy. And then related to that, and I know this is only going to be applicable for certain types of research or certain types of projects, but we do also have parking lots for polygons in the United States. So understanding surface parking lots, how many are there? What's the surface area? What are the nearby stores? Do they share it? All things of that nature. So some interesting urban planning and some ESG use cases there if people are interested. That's a pretty unique data set in what we've found.
Hey, MT, can I interrupt you with a question?
Yeah.
Got one from Andre here. Can you go into more details about how exactly we determine the open close months in the places data set? So like for POIs that close, do they remain in your database or are they dropped when you do something like a backfill?
Yeah, great question. So we're curating data from all over the place for all of these different places. And when we see stores like drop out of our curated sources, that's when we're flagging them as closed. Now, we won't just do it immediately. Like, it's possible they drop out for a second and they come back. So we like monitor that. But we're basically, if something drops out of our data set or drops out of all of our different sources, we're considering it to be closed. They do stay in our places data set. We're just marking them as closed. So we offer both open places as well as closed places that we are aware of. And again, that can be very helpful if you're doing like a time analysis and trying to understand like when things are opening and closing. So no, they don't drop out per se.
Got it. So presumably if it closes, you'll mark a close date that you're most aware of based on your kind of pipeline of data, but it'll remain in the places data set effectively into perpetuity. Like you're just having.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep, that's correct.
And I think there was something in the docs around like when you started tracking open and close. And so I think it's basically looking from that date forward, you should have pretty accurate open close data.
That's correct. And we include a column in there that's like tracking open since, which lets you know, like we've been looking at this place for how long. If it opened before that, we can't necessarily state that because we are adding places every month. But for the length of time that we are looking at a place, we include that.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Okay. So that wraps kind of places. And just as a, to highlight it or to recap it, right? Again, SafeGraph, places data company, the rows that we have in our data set are the places, the columns that we have in our data set are the attributes about those places. So now let's talk about SafeGraph spend. And that's taking this and extending effectively the columns that we have available about those places. And layering in this premise of like consumer spending behavior. So what SafeGraph spend is aggregated anonymized transaction data at the place level. We take a panel of transactions using kind of like our expertise in matching and understanding location data. We take as many of them and aggregate them to individual stores where possible. And then we aggregate up statistics for that store, for that place over a month. So what does that mean? This is just a good way of kind of depicting that. So say an individual Starbucks, a Starbucks at 123 Main Street. We're going to look at the span of a month and we're going to aggregate all of the transaction data that we see that we can tie back to that individual store and provide that detail. What that's super helpful for is then allowing people to decide the level of granularity or level of depth that they want to look at. So you've got an individual store, you could hand select like a few of them and say like a neighborhood, if you're interested in the behavior within a neighborhood, or you could pick it from all of the city of Seattle or the entire Northwest, or certainly a brand across the entire US, if interested. But we're all basically building it up from that individual place level. So kind of highlighting more like what that looks like. So again, the row in our database is going to be the place. We'll include this place key that allows you to tie back to the metadata that we have about that place. And then we're going to include statistics about an individual month. We generate this data monthly and deliver it on a monthly cadence as well. So looking at certainly the aggregated spend that we're seeing from these transactions, but also the number of transactions, the median spend per transaction. And then we also break it up a few different ways based on, say, like customer demographics, say like income levels or customer loyalty, right? So the number of times someone spends at an individual store and trying to track the difference in the way that that spending behavior changes. All of this information is provided again at that place level. So for an individual McDonald's or a Starbucks or any other store that we see in our data set, we're going to provide those statistics. There's a fairly long list, again, of the metrics that we provide here, but I think directionally, I've covered kind of what those are. And again, we try to be very transparent. All of these metrics, all of these columns are available on our website to look at. I wanted to dig in on one kind of specific portion of it. That's pretty unique to us. And is also, I would say, even newer than spend because we rolled it out after the fact. And that's this premise of what we call cross-shopping. What we mean by cross-shopping is basically, again, from the context of an individual store. So say the example that's up here is like a McDonald's, again, it's a 123 Main Street. For the customers who shopped at that McDonald's, where else did they shop in the same time period? So again, customers to us are effectively the cards that are being swiped at these individual stores. where else is that same customer swiping their card? As an example, say in this case, the ones that we put up there, at that McDonald's, in the month that we're talking about, 49% of the customers also shopped at a Target, or 35% of them also shopped at a Burger King. And we have about 10 columns broken up along different levels of metrics and understanding the different stores and services that, again, are seeing the same card swiped in all. I'm going to air quotes swipe there because some of these are also online as well. Also, there's a lot of tapping and inserting these days, so I gotta probably use a new verb. So you can see not only physical stores, so cross-shopping at physical brands, stores within the zip code, other people in the same NAICS category. And we're actually expanding this into delivery services, streaming services, excuse me, wireless carriers, rideshare services. This is really interesting to tie on like kind of like the online economy anchored to what people are actually still doing in store. And with that, just as kind of an example, so what can you do with cross shopping? Very interesting components around like competitive dynamics, like which stores do well maybe near each other or which stores really cross-pollinate frequently. Certainly from like an urban planning perspective, if there's like some kind of analysis that you can do that like in areas where there are lots of a certain type of place, it makes sense to also add another type of place. We've found some very odd, I shouldn't say odd, I guess surprising relationships between like gyms and certain restaurants, which like you would not expect. But I think the biggest layer like overarching all of this is this is a consumer behavior insight data set that you can layer onto other levels of analysis and kind of understand how they're, if and where and how they're behaving.
I got two questions for you to interrupt again. One, I'm going to backtrack slightly to places coverage, and then we'll hop back to spend. Can you elaborate a little bit? This is a specific ask around like the coverage around, you know, something like urban parks or just parks. Would something like parks just be its own like NAICS category effectively? And you could just see in the docs, like, how do you think about coverage? Is there a way for users to just check like, what's your coverage on a certain NAICS code, for instance? Yeah,
so we publish we call them our summary statistics. And on our summary statistics page, we include some search bars that allow you to look up NAICS codes. Or basically, if you don't know the NAICS code, we have the category descriptions and whatnot. So parks would absolutely fall into those. Everything from courts to EV charging stations would show up as an individual NAICS code or things of that nature. Cool. And I know it's not related to parks, but you can also do the same from a brand's perspective if it's broader stores that you're looking for.
Okay, perfect. And then there's a question around the visitation data to parks. I'm gonna like maybe generalize this question, given, you know, the focus of this conversation is on the visitations data, and we can talk about the transition away from that data from SafeGraph, and that's actually going to be provided by a new provider here on the platform called Advan. But generally, you know, because a park has geometry around it, you can still attribute visits to it in the same way that you would for any other type of POI data.
That's correct. Yeah, we still provide the geometry around any type of place. And then if you have the data necessary to generate the visits, or you're using it from a different provider, then yes, you can still attribute the foot traffic, or I would say GPS data per se, to those areas.
Perfect. And then to jump back to the spend that you're talking about now, can you go into a little more detail around the source behind the spend data? For instance, you know, is it credit card and debit card suppliers? How do you think about online versus in person? And then a little bit about, and this is the same similar problems I think you get always face with the visitation data, but like when we add new sources, for instance, of spend providers, how does that change? Like if the panel size is changing, how does that affect what the end users are seeing in this data? Sure. I think that's just like general questions important to understand.
Yeah. Okay. So on the panel itself, so we work with a provider that has a lot of transaction data. We can't disclose who the provider is, but it is one of the largest players in the space. And we are aggregating across debit and credit cards, across banks and issuing parties. So it's a fairly representative panel from that perspective. Of course, we are not seeing cash transactions. That's an important nuance. We are seeing credit card and debit card transactions. And then again, what's nice is that we are seeing both physical and online transactions. So again, where we can take the physical transactions and tie them to an individual store, we do that. For more of the online transactions, we either, if we can attribute them to a physical store, we will. So think of the concept of like a buy online, pick up in store. Like if the transaction does reference an individual store, we'll associate it as such. Otherwise, we're looking at some of these like online services, right? Like your Netflix subscription, no physical location associated with that. That's would show up somewhere in this like cross-shopping concept. Mm-hmm. So that's where we're saying like, okay, people who have Netflix subscriptions, are they like also, frequent Target purchasers or Walmart purchasers? Is it more with Target than Walmart? That's the type of thing that cross-shopping would show you. And then I think the second one is around this premise of like new data. So there's certainly the new places that we add every month. And we will aggregate spend data for the new places as they come online. We will do periodic backfills here as well, where we will go back through time and recalculate it's basically tying transactions that we didn't tie to anywhere in the past and now associating them with these new places. As far as like new spend sources, so like new credit cards and new debit cards that come online, we do provide panel statistics as part of this. So the number of cards that we're seeing broken up by area and where we are seeing them. So to the extent that that can help someone maybe normalize a little bit of the transactions, we can. I actually have a slide coming up here on a little bit of the nuance of using the data set. So I'll go ahead and get through that, and then we can obviously double back if I didn't answer all the questions.
You just bring up a good point, which I'll reiterate, is that the panel statistics come with the delivery of every month of data, right? And so to answer the question that's at the bottom of this question is, if the panel happens to double, which I know it doesn't fluctuate that extreme, but if it happens to double, are you going to see double the counts in visits in certain locations? Basically, with the panel summary, you'll be able to normalize it based on the changes that will happen. Obviously, the swings won't be doubling; it'll be single-digit percentages.
That's right.
Okay.
Yep.
Sounds good.
Okay, so that was cross shopping. I was just actually spend in general. I do know it, as Evan mentioned at the forefront, like a lot of folks are probably more familiar with using foot traffic data, maybe less familiar using like aggregated transaction data or what we're calling spend here. So just a quick kind of comparison, kind of a compare contrast. The highest level statement is just in a lot of circumstances, they can be used for the same outcomes, right? So if you're trying to generate popularity or like growth in a region, increased foot traffic, increased spend, both of those can be used in that kind of sense. The little bit of nuance that I would say from a spend perspective is spend is direct economic analysis, right? So like we're not interpreting anything here. We're not like wondering if that person went into the store and was a customer, they like literally swiped their card. We know they went there and that they were a visitor. So there's I guess like more like concrete conclusions that you can draw from that. It also, as we mentioned, allows for this premise of services and online as well, and tying that back to individual like physical brick and mortar places. Not only again with online orders that get shipped to a certain place, but also these surrounding services. It's also very helpful in scenarios where like the geometry or like the physical nature of the store is difficult. So like activity within a mall. Usually you can't ascribe foot traffic visits to individual stores within a mall. There's just too much noise within the broader building. No issues with that from a transaction data set, right? Like we know exactly which point of sale the transaction took place at. So that's where I guess spend has certain advantages. There are definitely advantages to foot traffic as well. Foot traffic tends to be a leading indicator for sure. Spend doesn't really help you with dwell times or like hours of popularity, right? The transactions usually process at one point during the day overnight. So we can't necessarily piece out, lunchtime rushes and things of that nature. Foot traffic providers can often do that. Foot traffic data is also typically available more quickly, right? Spend with the financial institutions, there's processing, there's aggregation, there's delays in kind of the delivery of that kind of stuff. And then the last piece, at least for our spend data set right now, from a home location perspective of these consumers, we typically have it at the city level. A lot of foot traffic data providers will go more granular than that to tracks or CBGs, if you're talking about tying it to individual demographics. So again, just a little bit of a compare and contrast. Certainly benefits of using both, but generally, in our experience, the use cases like consumer behavior and understanding trends, both of these do this quite well.
On I never thought of it that way on the like shapeless or like the polygon list. POI. Do you know if like, is there any like, I know you have this concept of like point POI in the places data set, like a red box, for instance, outside of a grocery store.
Yeah.
Can you see spend behavior on point POI then, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, if it's a red box, I guess for like an EV charging station or things of that nature. I mean, as long as they're able to pay with a credit card or debit card, there's no reason that we can't aggregate that data. A lot of it just comes down to volume, and again, the nuance of transaction matching, which is obviously not simple.
Very cool.
And I guess for what it's worth, obviously spend data, maybe I should have included it with the foot traffic piece here. Like spend data is going to be at stores. You need to be able to swipe the card. To the earlier question around parks, spend data is not going to be as valuable for parks unless there's like a kiosk or something that is allowing you to make some kind of a purchase at a park, or if there's an entrance fee or something to that effect. But just understanding like the use of a park spend won't be nearly as helpful. So I mentioned earlier the nuances of this data set. Important to keep in mind in any type of panel assessment, whether it's foot traffic or spend, obviously volume is key. The more volume you see, the better kind of takeaways you can, the more you can trust the takeaways from the data set. And the more likely it is to correlate to other, air quotes, truth sets or first party data. In the case of spend, and certainly for the use cases that I think kind of fit this community, aggregating across, areas or cities, regions, or brands is a really good use case for that, because you achieve the volume that's necessary. Like what you're looking at here is we took our spend data set and correlated it to McDonald's stated US revenues, and it was a very high correlation. That isn't necessarily the case at maybe an individual McDonald's. And the problem for that is that you can't assume that the panel is evenly distributed. So raw spend that you're seeing in an individual store may not be apples to apples to another individual store, because we just can't make statements about how many of the cards we saw. So that's certainly something to keep in mind if you're talking about individual like stack ranking of stores within a time frame. This data set's actually great for tracking the same cohort across time periods, right? So understanding, is the revenue at a store growing over time or contracting over time? That works really well because the panel stays fairly static around that individual store, and you can see if it's going up or down. Less so if you're looking at that store compared to a store in some other area, again, because of the even distributions. So just wanted to mention that as it pertains to the ways that people use that data. I will throw a lot of words on this screen, and I'm not going to cover them all, but you guys can pause this and take a look at it later. But there's obviously a lot of ways you can use this data, not only spend, but places data. It supports a wide range of use cases, whether it's urban planning, ESG, inflation analysis, so many different things. I can go on for quite some time. So there's plenty of those here. I think what's most interesting, though, especially on the spend front, I know Ryan has a very interesting demo set up to show how you can put this data into play. So unless any questions for me right now, I'll pause this and pass it over to Ryan.
Thanks, MT. I'll go ahead and steal the screen share here.
While Ryan is getting set up, one last question came in. Can you link spend to income level categories?
Yes. So from what's provided to us by our provider, we do have a column that breaks out the spend by income level. So you can see the amount of raw spend and the number of transactions that are coming from different income buckets. That's included as one of the columns.
Okay.
Also, again, we've got the city designation for the home city of the card holder. So if you want to take that and use some kind of demographic component, you can do that as well.
Sounds great. Ryan, go ahead and start walking through the demo.
Great. Yeah. So this demo is available via the Dewey community. If anybody wants to get in there and run the code themselves, we're going to run through just a really high level of how you can get the data through Dewey and get it into your analysis environment. And then we'll look at a couple of visualizations and talk about some things there. So first, in terms of setting the analysis environment up, there are really 4 steps. We've got write your credentials and get the access token. So in the Dewey marketplace, you've got your email and your password. And with that, you can get your access token via the API. Then you can request the available file names to you, depending what kind of subscription you've got or how many products you have checked out in the Dewey marketplace. You might have a bunch of different files, you might just have a few, but it's helpful to filter down to just the ones that you are interested in. So with that, you can filter to the files of interest. I'm going to show what we're doing here just to give an example of how you might do this. We're interested in the SafeGraph spend sample, which is free on the Dewey marketplace. And we're specifically looking at the months of June and July in 2022. This data covers Ohio. And of course, the rest of the data is available on the marketplace too. So here we filtered to our 2 files, and then we're going to request those 2 files and download them. We'll just take a look at what the data is here. I'm not going to talk through every column, but I'll just point out a couple of interesting ones. MT mentioned the place key column here. That has been great, has been incredibly useful for me in terms of joining SafeGraph data and other data sets. There is a place key service that you can append place keys to your data if you have the address information, the POI name, city, anything like that. Sometimes it won't have all the pieces of information, needs to give you a full place key, but it can give you a partial place key, which can be useful as well, where maybe you're at least just matching on the address, and then you can go through and manually check that things look right. Additionally, we've got the brands column here. As MT mentioned, not every location is associated with a brand, but SafeGraph has those included in the data set, which is really cool. There's some fun analysis that can be done looking at the smaller points of interest, not just the big ones like Walmart and Target. Of course, we've got our date ranges that the column pertains to, the raw total spend, which we'll be looking at in this demo, and then a bunch of other columns related to the number of transactions, customers, and locations, the cross shopping that MT was talking about. And I believe we've got the city in there as well. So at this point, I'm actually going to jump over and look at the documentation. Every time I work with SafeGraph data, I really appreciate the documentation. Something I'm starting to realize as I work with more and more data sets, documentation can really make or break an analysis project. Thorough documentation jumpstarts things, it speeds up the learning curve. And with good documentation, you're not blindly applying statistical methods to columns in hopes that some pattern reveals itself, maybe like a Kaggle competition, you could do something like that and get away with it. But you're able to actually apply some logic that guides your analysis. And maybe there's some feature engineering there too, if you're doing some model building. If you're thinking about working with this data, I really encourage you to glance through the documentation. It's a great resource. And so we'll just scroll down here and look at the raw total spend column. So we can see here, okay, total amount spent to this POI in transactions captured by our panel during the date range. Perfect. So now that we have a high level understanding of the data that we're looking at, we'll come back over to the demo and we'll look at a couple of visualizations. Our first visualization is going to look at the top spend brands, and this is in terms of that raw total spend column. We're not going to walk through the code line by line, but again, it is available as a demo through the Dewey community, and the data here is free too. So you can go through and run this code yourself. You can adjust the code, you can pull in different columns, build your own visualizations at absolutely no cost. So as we work through this, I will again hit on MT's point that the SafeGraph panel is just a sample of the entire population. And so when we analyze the data, we typically want to do it in aggregation and not focus as much on specific POIs at specific time periods. So in this first visualization, we're going to aggregate at the brand level across the entire state of Ohio for both June and July. And we'll just build a little bar chart to show the top 10 brands. And anytime we're dealing with a new data set, especially one that is, again, just a sample of the population, it's a good idea to set some expectations and ensure that they're met, or if they aren't met, dig into why, so we can ensure that we're understanding the data correctly. So for me, looking at this bar chart, it's comforting to see Walmart with the most raw total spend that fits my expectations. Similarly, the rest of the brands are all believably in the top 10, so that's good to see as well. So here we're just aggregating at the brand level in this code, and then summing up the raw total spend to build this visualization. SafeGraph's data is pretty clean and ready to go out of the box, which is a great thing. So it doesn't take much code to get this into an analysis ready format. In the next visualization, we're going to look at spend over time. So one of the best things about this data is it is longitudinal. It spans long time periods. We can look at things year over year. We can look at things month to month. And that could be helpful for a number of analysis projects, especially related to inflation, which is, of course, a hot topic lately. So in this case, we're going to do just kind of a mini view of what that might look like to view things over time. We're going to look at the percent change in raw total spend from June to July in 2022 for each of those top 10 brands. I've got the data frame itself printed out there too that you can reference, but the visualization here shows that actually all 10 of these brands saw a decrease in raw total spend from June to July. Now, there should certainly be some error bars and maybe a little bit of skepticism. For example, Kroger is pretty close to zero. Do we know that Kroger, actually had lower spend in July than June? No, but we can be fairly confident that Lowe's had a lower change, a more dramatic decrease in spend than Kroger did. So these next two visualizations, the last ones we're going to look at, are, I would say, less aggregated. They're more on the POI level. So a gentle reminder to proceed with caution when it comes to single POI analysis, but I do think it's helpful to take a look at how that can be used. Here we have the POI level spend over time, and we're going to be looking at this as a box plot for each of these brands. As you can see, there's quite a bit of variance, and many of them are hovering around zero. Walmart is pretty close to zero. Kroger is right around zero. We do see Lowe's somewhat significantly below zero, which meets our expectations based on the previous chart. And so perhaps there's something, if you're wanting to investigate Lowe's, maybe there's some location specific things, and you want to look at why are these POIs able to succeed or grow from month to month where 99% of our locations saw a decrease in revenue. And this final visualization, we're going to look at a map. So we'll zoom in specifically on Kroger because they're hovered right around zero, and I thought there might be some good variation in terms of positive and negative growth from month to month. In this map, we've got a blue circle for Kroger locations that had a positive change in spend from June to July, and a red circle for those with a negative change. And we're actually using the POI's place key hexagon to put these points on the map. I believe SafeGraph Places actually does have more precise latitude, longitude, but the place key hexagon provides a neat little way to approximate the locations here, which when we're visualizing things on a map at a high level, maybe that's good enough. As we look at the map, you can maybe imagine some geographic analyses that could come from this. In particular, we see maybe in the north by Toledo, almost all of those POIs are seeing negative growth, whereas closer to the southwest portion near Cincinnati, we've got a pretty good variety of positive and negative growth, and maybe even more positive than negative growth. But of course, overall, we did see that Kroger was right around neutral. So if you're building some analysis, there could be some geographic components that you want to build in, and SafeGraph Spend certainly enables that. So to finish up, I think this data set is really exciting on its own, of course, but beyond Spend, there are a lot of other cool data sets available on Dewey. I'm most excited about the use cases that arise when this data is combined with data sets on public health, foot traffic, stock prices, web traffic is coming, and census demographics, and a ton more. I think this academic community has done a lot of great work at the intersection of public policy and the economy, and I really hope that this data set can be a catalyst for even more enlightening work there. With that, I will turn it back over to Evan.
Awesome. Thank you, Ryan. That was super helpful. I shared a link in the chat for that demo. We'll also send the recording plus a link to the demo to everyone who attended today. And to comment actually on your last point, Ryan, I love your comment around joining disparate data sets, even from different vendors. SafeGraph made a really good push to launch this concept of a place key, which again is a unique identifier for physical places. One of the vendors I'm onboarding soon, I won't name them yet because they're not live yet, but they actually already have the place key pre-appended. And so now you can join those data sets easily with that shared join key. And then for folks, Ryan mentioned like website traffic and analytics, I'm working with a vendor and, because we already have users using SafeGraph's data, I'm using SafeGraph's brand list as the list for web domains that we're going to go after and add as website traffic providers. And then, because I have to pull that brand list myself to get the domains, now I have a crosswalk to join those data sets together. So you can see the value of getting a bunch of different data sets together that live in the same ecosystem and are easily joined together. So I think that's going to be a community effort. There's going to be times when, you guys create these crosswalks and can share them with the community, but I think it really helps us kind of push this innovation and research forward as we can, work with those data sets together. Cool. I think there's one question. It might be a little tactical to read out loud in the moment. I'll answer this offline, so let me copy it now. But thank you both for the presentation. I thought that was super helpful. And look forward to seeing everyone in 2 weeks for our next presentation. We'll send out some information on what that's going to be soon. But MT, thank you. Ryan, thank you. And we'll wrap it up there. So thanks everyone for attending.
Thanks, Evan. Thanks all.
Thanks.
Bye, guys.